Hello and welcome to the Boagworld Show, the longest running web design podcast where we look at user experience design, conversion optimization and working in the web. On this week's show, we're going to discuss the role of aesthetics in creating a great user experience, using AI to carry out user interviews, and how to go about discussing price with your clients. My name is Paul Boag, and joining me as always is Marcus Lillington.
Hello.
But we also have a guest on this week's show. We have Andy, the pioneer, Clarke, as we were just discussing a moment ago.
In take
you were talking
one.
about your in take one when nobody had their act together. Andy, you were telling us about your bio that you were discussing whether you're a veteran or not. I liked that. That made me laugh.
Yeah, no, we were talking in take one about how our mutual friend Jeff Graham and I were discussing how I would describe myself in the bio, whether it would be veteran, and I decided that no, veteran was too ageist. I thought
it has a gravitas,
but I
though,
quite
surely.
liked it does have gravitas, but I quite liked the word pioneer. But then the more and more I thought about it, I kept feeling like one of those, like, you know, guys that panned for gold in the West.
Yes.
Which kind of fits with the beard,
And the
doesn't
hat.
it now? So
Yeah.
I'm
I think you
Exactly.
could overstretch that kind of image and actually say, in the very early days of CSS, you were somewhat panning for which CSS feature could. No, that's terrible. I give up.
Stop now.
Perhaps,
that really is.
perhaps veteran would have been better, because then you could have said, well, I've survived the browser war, which was a traumatic time. People don't even know what we're
Do
talking
you remember?
about.
Do you remember, Marcus?
Go on, what?
Klondike Pete's Golden Nuggets
I
breakfast
do,
cereal.
yes.
See, that's what I want to be. Klondike Pete.
Well, you look a bit like him, to be fair.
Thank you.
So, because obviously Andy has no ability to introduce himself in any kind of sensible way, I will do it for him. Andy has been around since really the beginning of
Dawn of time.
The beginning of certainly the web standards movement, where we began to shift away from table-based design towards CSS-based design, and he was one of the pioneers or veterans of that particular field, and wrote some really incredible books that were very influential back in the day. But like everybody of our generation, we're now fading stars that nobody cares about or nobody knows about. But that said, Andy has also more recently become the kind of voice and champion of art direction within websites. So while the rest of the industry is very much moving towards kind of frameworks and templates and that kind of stuff, Andy is trying to encourage us to embrace more of the aesthetics and design principles where we can learn from things like print. And so that's where we want to talk a little bit further. And he's also old friends of ours. We've been doing shows with him on a podcast called One Footer in the Grave, which you might want to check out if you're quite happy to listen to four old men waffling about their sad existence. I can't say a higher praise than that, really. I mean, why wouldn't you want to listen to that? And then he's also my travel companion as we go around America. He comes and came and spent some time with us out there, which was a lot of fun as well. Hey, talking of my travelling in America.
Sorry, I've just got one more thing just to say about One Footer in the Grave. When I edit this, because I edit this show and I edit the One Footer show as well, I laugh more when I'm editing the One Footer show. So, so that's the best advert for it, surely.
Yeah. One Footer is just silly fun. Well, there is an expectation.
Serious.
There's an expectation somebody might learn something, but you never know. It can be dodgy.
There is a serious point and a segue.
Okay, go for it.
To the main topic, or the first topic of our discussion. In that, the thing about One Footer is that it really is all about personality.
Yeah.
If somebody is thinking about working with us, I would recommend that they would listen to an episode of One Footer in the Grave, because the experience of dealing with people is one of the most important aspects of doing a job, buying a service, whatever. Having an affinity with somebody or something or some brand is incredibly important. And I think that, you talked about art direction, but art direction is only about communication. And it's about communicating a brand or a message or a personality or creating an experience that people have a connection to.
Yeah.
And, One Footer is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Because, I would hope that anybody that hires one of the three of us will already know that we can do the job. We don't really need to prove that after 25 years. But will they enjoy the process?
Yeah.
And that's what's important about communication. And I think that's what makes the difference between something that is, good and efficient and, usable.
Yeah.
And something which you actually come away from having smiled a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I totally agree with that. The analogy that I always use, right, is this first occurred to me when we were in Vegas once, and I was walking past all these slot machines, and they're all flashing and buzzing, and there's all this stuff going on. I thought you wouldn't want to get a kind of usability designer designing a slot machine, because it would just be a beige box with a screen on it that when you put your money in the slot, it just says you lose on it, and that would be it. There'd be no, because that's the most efficient way of doing it, isn't it? There's no need to do anything else. It's all a random generated thing anyway. So you put your money in, it just says you win, you lose, job done. And I think a lot of websites can turn into that sometimes, of this kind of bland experience, while the personality needs to be laid on top of that. You need to add the sense of fun, the interaction, the flashing lights, the feel that you've got some kind of control over it. And that's where I see the real value of things like art direction. And I don't know whether it's art direction or just aesthetic design or branding design. I'm not quite sure what the right word of it is. But it's very easy to swing too far one way or the other, because equally you don't want websites that are all fluff and totally unusable. And you seem to hit that sweet spot really well.
Here's the thing, right? And you're talking about, I don't know much about slot machines, but I know a lot more about pinball machines.
Yeah, that would be a great example. Yeah.
So you walk into an arcade in Rill, or, Skegness, or Las Vegas. They're all pretty much the same place. And there's a whole bank of pinball machines. What is it and they're all the same. They all do the same thing. They all have a thing that you pull that goes bang, and it fires a metal ball around, and it ping-pongs around the thing, and you rack up points. They're all pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So what draws me towards one pinball machine versus another? Yeah. Now, it could be that one of them is the Barbie pinball.
I was going to say.
I'm going to stay well clear of that.
No, you wouldn't. You'd go straight to the Barbie machine.
I think I'm going to steer clear of. Much as I'd like to, shoot metal balls at Barbie, but if there's a Terminator machine, or if there's a Godzilla machine,
Godzilla,
then I'm going to be using that. Now, why is that? That's because I feel like I have an affinity with that character or that brand.
Yeah.
So I choose to put my pound coin into the Godzilla machine.
Yeah.
They're all exactly the same. And I think that things have got worse on the web since, well, first of all, we used to make websites. And then we said that we crafted digital experiences. And now the buzzword, of course, is product.
Yes.
Everybody's a flipping product designer.
We talked about this just the last show and said it's bollocks.
Did we?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
And the thing is, and people will say to me, do you design products? Now, I always think of that as like designing power tools.
Yeah, or a mug.
I'm not the guy who is going to design an electric drill as a product. I'm the guy that's going to persuade you to buy Marcus's brand of power tools over Boag's.
Agreed.
I would highly
Power
recommend
tools.
Marcus's over mine because I have no DIY capabilities whatsoever.
So that's the thing,
Yeah.
right? It's about affinity. Now, some things, again, keeping the Las Vegas analogy going, some things are just table stakes.
Yeah.
Would you design a search box that people can't search in?
Mm-hmm.
Of course you wouldn't. You'd be an idiot. Would you hide the add to cart button or make the sign up process complicated? No, of course you wouldn't. But that doesn't mean to say that they all have to look the flipping same.
Yeah. And going back to the product designer shift, that now everybody's calling themselves a product designer rather than a UX designer or a UI designer. My other problem with that is that it places the emphasis in the wrong place. It places it on the product, the thing, rather than on the use of that thing, right?
It looks
and
internally.
So it removes the humanity from it. It removes the experience from it. And so you end up with, stuff that's very usable, maybe, possibly, very good from a business perspective, but isn't at all inspiring, doesn't resonate with people, all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I totally agree that really it's a dangerous direction that I think we go in, where we don't consider the overall experience and how it resonates with people. I always think about MailChimp in the early days, when Aaron Walters, worked over there, and he injected all kinds of silliness into that app, that made it so appealing. Yet all of that's been stripped out now because we've all got to be too sensible and grown up and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that something needs to be silly. Silly isn't always the right feel.
Character. Maybe.
Yeah, it just needs to have a
Reflects the
character
brand.
of some description. Yeah.
Yeah, the character can be serious and businesslike. It doesn't have to, have a MailChimp style tone of voice. And I've been wondering how we've arrived at this point.
Yeah.
And there are lots of reasons why I think that's been the case. We can all point a finger at a framework and say, well, everything looks like Bootstrap or Material Design, or everything looks like a Squarespace template, so therefore, everybody just copies what they know. And, that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem, I think, is economic and cultural, in that when times get tough, clients are less likely to want to take risks. So when they can see something else that has worked, they think, I want my thing to look like that. But I think the biggest problem is our industry and education.
I was going to say the same thing.
Because we are all of a certain age, and we all did things before the web, and some of those things were, designy things. So we picked up a whole load of experience and a mindset that kept us very curious about finding things and applying different things in different ways, etc. But the people that are coming out of, and I don't even know what the courses are called these days.
Lot of boot
at Manchester
camps
Met, they used to be called.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, but people that come out of that kind of education, and I know this from speaking to educators, is they're not interested in being curious. They're just interested in, solving a problem or getting somebody from A to B or whatever. So we've had a whole generation of people that now put things on screen that we can look at that have not had the experience of thinking about communication. Their skill is not in communication. Their skill is in saying, what is the optimum position for this button and what should the button text say?
Yep.
And the problem doesn't come, from one spot, but a big problem is that the people that are designing websites these days do not have a design background. Now, we can argue about the definition of design. You could say, well, it's design when you put post-it notes on a wall and you figure out the most efficient user flow.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because the definition of design has changed. It's shifted from being about visual aesthetic design to be about, if you ask most people these days what a designer does, is he solves problems. And that is a very big shift in attitudes. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's not the complete picture either, is it?
No, it's not the complete picture. But let's take the power tools example again. So, you have a product and you want to sell it. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? Well, you want people to be able to buy the product, and you want them to have, the objections handled and the unanswered questions answered before they press the add to cart button or whatever. But that's part of the problem. But another part of the problem is convincing them why they should be buying this damn thing in the first place, and why they should be buying the Marcus drill instead of the Paul drill.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing. So it isn't necessarily about how something looks. It's much more about communicating messages, telling stories, making people feel a certain way. And that's what's lacking, I think.
Yeah. I tell you as well, I think the other thing that people underestimate when it comes to aesthetics is that, it's not... Because there's a lot of people that's going, all right, this is all well and good, Andy, but I just work on a SaaS app, right? I'm not working on a marketing site. I'm working on a SaaS app. So therefore, this doesn't apply to me. But I would argue that isn't actually the truth, because how you feel about something has a big impact on the level of engagement that you're willing to have with that thing, how long were you willing to stick with it over going to a competitor. So it affects things like lifetime value. But most significantly, if you look at the psychology of cognitive load, right? So cognitive load is how hard we find something to use. Actually, the better our mood, the lower our cognitive load, and the easier we find it to use things. So if you've got an interface that is delightful, even if in tiny little ways, it helps to kind of nurture that feeling that, I can keep going with this. I can achieve my goal. I don't get frustrated and give up as quickly. So I think it applies in a lot of situations beyond just a marketing website. Because you've designed products for years, didn't you? Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was going to come on to say, up until, I can't believe it's going to be 2 years in May.
Wow.
Since I stopped working with Nozomi Networks in Switzerland. Now, they, lovely people that they are, they produce a cybersecurity app solution. Now, what this thing does is they put a box and it sits on your network, and it monitors network traffic, and it has, connections to the internet to check for vulnerabilities and does all of this kind of technical stuff. And it's not just for kind of IT. They sell these things into transit systems and nuclear power stations and airports and, all this really critical stuff. Now, does somebody that's using that app want to be surprised and delighted?
Yeah, of course.
No, of course they don't. The worst thing that you could have in a cybersecurity situation is a surprise.
Yeah, sorry.
However, Nozomi Networks is not the only company that produces this type of solution. So what I did when I was there, as well as working on, the actual, we'll call it UX of the project, how does somebody find out what the most common alerts are, or what the strongest vulnerabilities are, or which systems on their network are the most vulnerable, operating systems or whatever, as well as working on those. And I did do quite a lot of work on data visualization. The other thing that I really pressed hard for was moments.
Yeah.
Now, there are moments in a cybersecurity app which can be branded, that can be distinctively Nozomi Networks or whatever the client is. When you're logging in, when there's an error, when you make a change to an account thing, when you log out. The whole, logging in, logging out experience is something that can be heavily branded in the broadest sense.
Onboarding is another great example.
Even if you are working on if you're working on something that you think, I don't need art direction for this, well, you're wrong, because art direction is thinking about how somebody feels at a certain point. And that applies just as much to, inverted commas, boring cybersecurity app as it does to anything else.
I think, Paul, you said that the description of a designer has changed to somebody who solves problems. Well, that's a kind of UX designer. That's sticky notes. That's wireframes. That's that kind of thing. And my very simplistic view of this is I started seeing websites probably 10 years ago looking like coloured-in wireframes. And that's how they stayed. And basically, what it is people like Andy and maybe Lee and Ed who work for Headscape aren't being employed as much because the UX, and I'm not doing UX designers down here, but somebody who doesn't have that kind of art school background are being hired basically to design websites, and that's what's happened. Do we think it's getting worse? That's what I want to know. Or
I think it's with it's with everything. It kind of goes through phases. I think part of the problem does go back to what Andy said a minute ago about education, but I think there's another element in this, is that I don't think, and certainly the education that I'm aware of doesn't put the same emphasis on creative thinking and creative visions as once it did. So I don't think people are being taught how to be creative, and that was actually we really ought to answer your question first, Marcus, but that was a question I wanted to ask Andy, because if there are people listening to this who are convinced, right, who are going, these guys have got a point, but that's all well and good, how do you start? I mean, I'm not like Andy, right? I am very much a UX designer, and I look at what Andy does and I look at the design concepts that he produces, and I can't help but go, how did he do that? How did he get to that place of producing something that makes you smile, that has got real personality? So, Andy, is there any kind of advice you can give about how I do that kind of stuff, how I get to that more creative place and break out of the kind of what coloured in wireframes?
Before he says that, I'm going to say something which I think is potentially you might disagree with. I think you're born with it. I don't think you can learn it.
Yeah, well, I'm beginning to wonder that myself.
Back to you,
but
Andy.
I think you could lose it.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh, okay, go on then.
I think that curiosity is the most important thing that you can teach kids. Now, unfortunately, our education system doesn't really accommodate curiosity. It teaches people what they need to learn to pass an exam, but it doesn't teach them how to learn or the enjoyment of learning or anything.
But it didn't when we were at school, Andy. Not when we were at school. Well, it was. I was taught to be curious.
Art
changed for my kids. Is exactly what you just described, and they're now in their 30s. So yeah.
Well, here's the thing. I wanted to take the piss out of Marcus when I knew that we were going to do this podcast. So we talked in our offline messages group a couple of weeks ago about this issue of Smash Hits magazine, which features the youthful-looking Marcus Lillington with his fun facts number 29. This is from November 1988. Now, I've actually written an article about smash hits for Invato recently. Now, I pick up this magazine and I look through it and I get to certain points and I go, oh, that's nice.
Right, yeah.
I like the way they've done those quotes. Oh, the contents page looks interesting. That's almost like a sitemap.
Yeah.
This headline treatment is really good. I like the way that they've divided up the columns. That full, that image that they've combined with, photographic image that they've combined with a graphic thing. That's really cool. And I park that away somewhere.
Yeah.
So that when something comes back up, I go, ooh, I remember Smash Hits did something interesting with quotations. This is a youthful brand I'm designing for.
Yeah.
And as you know, I mean, we're going back about 9 years now, but after running this business for such a long time, I was at the absolute bottom of, my mental reserves.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it anymore. So ended up going off to Australia. Long story short, even though that adventure didn't quite work out, one of the things that it did was it allowed me time to rediscover my kind of curiosity about design in general.
Yeah.
So my bookcase, which is next to me here, when I left for Australia, it was probably 95% web books.
Yeah.
Most of them written by people that we knew. Now, there is literally one web book on this bookcase, which is the web typography book by our friend Richard Rutter. It's the only one that survived. Oh, actually, no, there's two. There's Leia Varu's CSS Secrets, which I just have a real fondness for.
Right.
So, out of probably, 100, 150 books in this studio, 2 of them are web books.
Yeah.
And the others are books about packaging, magazine design, art direction. I've got a book here about Blue Note record covers. I've got a book about Sainsbury's, which is, for our international listeners, is a British supermarket chain. All of their packaging and tickets and labels. So I think that you sit there and you go through it and you go, I've got to design a new site. It might be for a university. It might be for a, whatever the client is. And you just think, so-and-so tackled this. And it doesn't necessarily have to be really glamorous too. There's an Italian designer called Giovanni Pintori, and he spent pretty much his entire career working for Olivetti business machines. So you remember Olivetti typewriters? And his work is wonderful. And he spent his entire career designing and developing a visual language for Olivetti. And therefore, it doesn't necessarily have to be your most glamorous client. We're not talking about designing for Coca-Cola or Nike every day.
No.
It could be that you're designing for, as I've done recently, a company that decontaminates nuclear power stations.
Yeah.
Well, important.
Right?
Yeah, important, if not glamorous.
It is important. Right? But it's certainly not glamorous. But what you do is you can look through that and you go, well, what am I trying to solve? I'm trying to describe in some way this company's process. Oh, that's a very similar to the way in which you would describe another process. I'll go back into my bookshelf or my scrapbook or whatever.
Yeah.
And all visual design is often just an amalgamation of other things.
Yeah.
And, that's not limited just to, the web or to design in general. Marcus, you will know from music, Smoke on the Water was, the riff from Smoke on the Water was based on the same, I forget which song it was now.
There are many, yeah.
But it was the same song that inspired Hey Joe by Jimi Hendrix. And all of these things are kind of, as long as you don't literally rip something off in a Ed Sheeran, allegedly, kind of way.
He won that case.
Or a Noel Gallagher kind of way.
I know he did. I said allegedly. That it is about absorbing influences and then being able to kind of selectively think about something that you're trying to achieve and then remember where you saw something that might work.
Yeah. And I could really testify to that because, of course, I went to art college like you did, and I had that. I was into architecture. I was into medieval kind of documents. I was anything that had some kind of visual flair to it. I used to love it wherever it came from, and especially, of course, in those days, you couldn't refer to the web because the web was shit. You had to look outside of the industry. And I think as my career shifted towards UX and more of the business side of things, I stopped doing that, and my creativity went with it. So yeah, I totally see where you're coming from.
I've had a bit of an epiphany here because that's too.
You can get cream for that.
That's too strong. But it's kind of. I've often thought, what is it that makes certain companies pay for the services of a Headscape or similar level agency or higher than us? And that's the difference. It's really blinking obvious. If you go down a step to cheaper options, this is the bit that gets missed out. We don't do the creative. We don't get inspired by the thing I saw in the magazine because that would work great with the navigation on the site. You just take what's off the shelf. There's 5 options and you can have option number 4. That's the difference. I know it's not really an epiphany, is it? But it was a bit of a realisation. That's what people are paying for.
It is. And this is something that, again, I've been kind of wrestling with during the terrible year that was last year. So as well as there being fewer inquiries coming through the door, they were of significantly lower value.
Yeah.
So whereas, I might have, I don't know, let's just imagine that I might have charged an average job out at 25 grand. Now I might be looking at a £10,000 budget. So where can those costs be saved? Where is the value, actual value to the customer? And I've figured out that the value that I provide is not in the website bit. Making a website is really easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. It's really flipping easy.
These days,
which is why a lot of people do it themselves.
Yeah.
So you can use a Squarespace template and drag things around, and you can make a website, and it's good. But what you're missing is what I or we bring to the party, which is that kind of understanding about how you tell a story and how you communicate to a potential customer. So what I now do is I will now say to clients, look, okay, if you want to save the money, we've got to look at where we're going to save it. And I think you should, instead of you should be spending 95% of your budget on creative and 5% on the actual implementation of the website.
Interesting.
And if that means nuclear decontamination company, that you want to save a significant amount of money, we're going to build this on Squarespace. You're still going to get a bespoke design. It's not going to look like every other flipping Squarespace template out there, but we can put that together in a matter of days without having to hire an engineering team. So you're going to save that. I'm going to push the monthly price over to you, so I'm not charging you for hosting or technical support, but I'm doing what I can bring, the value that I provide.
Yeah.
And I think you've just got to be incredibly honest with a customer and say, I'm not afraid to talk about cost. This is what I charge. This is how long it will take, and this is what you will get. And if you want to save money, this is where I think you should save the money.
I also,
and if you want to go for the cheap guy down the road, he's only going to be doing a WordPress template anyway. So your back end is going to be just as crap.
Yeah. And I think that becomes even more relevant as we see, vibe coding. I hate that word so much, but, as AI effectively can do a lot of the building for you, the value isn't in the building of the website. You're entirely right. The value is in the way it's presented, the usability of it, the creative of it, all of those kinds of things. I think there will be a big group of people, listening to this. Well, I say big group of people, only 4 people listen, but
there's 3 of us here.
A big proportion. Yeah, exactly. Who are going, well, hang on a minute. A lot of the time I'm just handed a brand, right? The company has already got a brand identity. And you must come across that. How do you deal with that when, they've got some logo and a couple of fonts and a few colours?
Great.
Did you just...
Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, here's the thing, right? Because the fonts and the colours and the logo are assets. Now, we all know, having been given brand guidelines or brand documents in the past, that 9 times out of 10... they don't actually cover what you need to learn anyway. I mean, do they cover how to colour images so that they all look consistent? No. Do they cover what the off state of a button needs to be? What colour it changes to? No, of course they bloody don't. So brand guidelines are just a starting point. But at least if they have them, they have the logo, they have the typefaces, whatever. It's a good starting point because you can then say to a client, you chose this for a particular reason. Why did you choose that colour? Why did you choose that, very swirly serif cursive typeface? Oh, because I wanted to look elegant. All right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a starting point. And then you build a story on top of that. It's much, much, much more than just the assets, the visual assets.
Brand interpretation is what it's about.
Oh, I like that. Oh, I'm going to use that.
That
sounds
comes out
posh.
in every sales call I've ever had.
I like it. I tell you what you did say that when you mentioned the word elegant. I think that's something that I tend to do with a lot of my clients, and I encourage those that I coach as well to adopt this approach, is agree a set of words that you want your website to communicate. Do you want it to be friendly or professional? Do you want it to be formal or informal? Those kinds of things. And I think having that conversation up front makes an enormous difference in terms of you're not just stabbing in the dark in terms of what the client is going to resonate with. And the other thing I do,
yes,
yeah, okay, I feel a butt coming on. Go on.
I'll wait for you to finish.
Well, you're not going to like the second half even more, right? Because one of the problems that I see a lot of agencies and designers having is that you then present back the design and you get into these kind of, I don't quite like that and I'm not sure about that, and you get into these endless debates. So what I've taken to doing is, once I've got my set of keywords, you've got a design, I then put that in front of users and I give them I basically survey them. Do you feel that this design is formal or informal? Do you feel it's this or that? And so that I get the user replying whether the design is communicating what I want it to communicate, rather than a stakeholder going, well, I'm not quite sure about this. So effectively, you can avoid the endless iteration of dealing with clients' whims and their perspective on what the design likes. And I'll be interested in how you deal with that problem, because I bet you don't deal with it like that.
2 things.
Right.
Nothing wrong with testing.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with asking questions.
Yeah.
It's part of the job.
Yeah.
Asking questions, doing testing should validate design decisions.
Yes.
Not determine them.
Yes.
Second thing, I bet that if I drove down to Prestatyn and went to 10 businesses and said, what do you think your brand word should be?
Yeah.
Every single one of them would say friendly.
Oh, yeah.
Every single one would say professional.
Yeah.
Right? Every single one would say trustworthy.
Yeah.
So, what I do is I ask a separate set of questions. Sometimes.
Yeah, okay.
If your brand was a film, what film would it be?
Yes.
If your brand was a
Famous person,
TV personality, who would it be?
Or I always think about Lee at Headscape has got one of if your brand was a reception area, what's your ideal reception area like? What's the music that's playing? How does the person greet you? What's hanging on the wall? That kind of thing. I thought that was a clever one.
We do, which I find is the best of all, because you're absolutely right, Andy. But there's a part 2 to that. If everyone says, "Oh yeah, we're dynamic and we're professional," all these kind of things, we do a thing which we call word pairs, which a lot of people would do. You know, are you more formal or informal?
This and that.
But the magic is we add what we think a graphic representation, a kind of mood board for what formal is versus a mood board for what informal is. So we're not talking in the abstract. We're talking about this stuff. Is this represent you, or is it more like this stuff? And we get them to kind of move a slider along either way, which, again, is all part of the brand interpretation stuff.
I've got another one that...
I do this with typeface discussions, is that I will say, you know, having spoken to you and listened to what you've got to say, you know, there's a spectrum of formal typefaces. How formal do you want to be? Do you want to be, you know, Bankside formal, or do you want to be Georgia neutral formal?
Yeah.
Or do you want to be slab serif bold formal? And they go, yeah, okay, so yeah, that one. And they say, which one of these three things feels more like
really powerful exercise that gets everyone on board and makes them feel like they've made, because they have made real genuine design choices.
Yeah.
It's great.
I tell you the other thing I do with the words, I will sometimes ask them to select things that they're not. That can be quite interesting. You know, so we're friendly, but not... I can't think of a good example. We're friendly,
chummy.
But we're not... chummy, yes, perfect. Thank you, Marcus, for saving me there. And that kind of helps to narrow it down a lot as well, is to add a not onto the end of each of them.
That's really good.
Do you know what?
The other, I have another golden rule, which is, some people are going to not like this.
That means it's going to be
designer,
great. Go for it.
But as a pioneering veteran designer, I have learnt this over the years. You only give clients a choice over something that they can't bugger up.
No,
So and something that doesn't matter, because people love to contribute. And if you produce the most perfect design, they feel like they have to put their own stamp on it. They feel like they have to have contributed. So give them opportunities to contribute throughout the process.
Yeah.
But don't ever give them something which you are not 100% okay with if they choose it.
Yes. Amen to that. Couldn't agree more. And do you know what? I think we ought to wrap this up. And I think that is a really good piece of advice to wrap up on. So thank you for that, Andy. If people want to find out more about you, and you got a really good newsletter, as I remember, as well, that people ought to check out. So tell us about that.
Do have a newsletter which has been on pause actually since Christmas, because I've been too lazy to do it, but I am actually kicking it off again. So stuffandnonsense.co.uk is the hub for everything. It's the design studio, there's the newsletter, there's the blog, there's links to my YouTube channel and stuff like that on there. So stuffandnonsense.co.uk.
Yeah,
that's where I am.
That's great. And Andy does brilliant courses as well that I'd highly recommend, and all kinds of good stuff. So he's definitely a guy worth following. Just to wrap up, because I feel like people expect a certain format from this show. We've just completely blown it out the window. I did want to leave with an app that I discovered this week, because people seem to like it when I recommend apps. And it's called Wiser. And it's quite interesting. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this, but I like to keep you up to date with new things that are coming on. And it's basically... you have to do all those user interviews and they take forever to do and it's hard to organise them and all the rest of it. Well, you can now get AI to do the interviews for you, right? And you could go to their website, which is, I think it is Wiser. So, WHYSER.ai. And you can actually take a sample interview where you're interviewed by this AI. And I was actually pretty damn impressed. It sounded like a terrible idea to me, but I did it anyway. And what impressed me is that it adapted to what my answers were and was kind of asking follow-up questions. And even at the end, it said, do you have any questions you want to ask? And it was responded to my answers to those questions. It's a bit of a weird one because they don't seem to have any pricing on the website at the moment. They just let you use it for free. I'm guessing it's in early access or something like that. But obviously this is hugely beneficial if you're really short on time and you can't do, any interviews. Then this is a way that would enable you to do them, and maybe do more interviews than you would have done previously. So, it's kind of worth it from that point of view. The AI guides you through the whole process, from working out what your questions should be to running the sessions for you and even analysing the data afterwards. So it's a very intuitive, easy to set up experience. The only thing I would say that made me slightly concerned about this is it removes you from the user. Right. So it's another barrier between you and the user, and you're not actually having the conversation with them. You're not the one talking to them. So that just makes it much harder to empathize with them, and understand their needs on a kind of personal human level, because there's this machine between you. But beyond that, it's a really useful little thing, that could help you out if you don't normally have chance to do user interviews. So check it out, see what you think, and let me know. I think we'll call it a day at that point. Marcus, have you got a joke for us?
I have. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right now. Scientists have found that cows produce more milk when the farmer talks to them. Apparently, it's a case of in one ear and out the other.
That's
in one ear and out the other.
He didn't say it very well.
Yeah, still lost me.
Udder.
No, I'm joshing with you.
His pronunciation and delivery is terrible with these things. He didn't say udder right. He said in one ear, out the other ear. Or something.
It wasn't that bad, Paul. Come on.
He screwed up. No, it wasn't that bad. But it was heading in that direction. We only have the joke so we can, criticise Marcus at the end of the show. That's the way it goes. Oh, you're so hard done by. Andy, that was actually brilliant. I think that was there's some really useful stuff in there that people can take away and implement. And I would encourage you to check out Andy and the work that he's doing, and he shares so much about what he does, which is really good. If you think I'm prolific, then Andy's up there with me. So definitely check him out. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Bye. Bye.